I can't believe I drove to Victoria for I don't know how many times now from Rockport, but it's a good drive and this museum is beautiful. I just want to thank everybody that has been involved from Victoria and also a few people from Rockport. I do live in Rockport, Texas, and I was doing a show there at the Art Center. It was called, I had a one-person show in 2017 called Fantastic Garden, and it ended up being mostly cabbages, so people know it as the Cabbage Show. Well, two of your board members came over, the NAE board members came over to see the exhibit, and they invited me to put in a proposal for the NAE. That was a little over 3 years ago. And I did, and they asked me what I would be painting, and I said, well, I mean, who could think what you might do in 3 years? And I said, well, something about gardens. So a couple of months later, we had Hurricane Harvey. And Hurricane Harvey hit Rockport very hard. And my yard lost 12 large oak trees. So I had been doing, most of my paintings had been coming from my own garden, which was a very shaded paradise, and it turned into a sun-drenched nothing. So to begin with, I mean, sun-drenched nothing, there was nothing left. One of the things that was standing, or that I had in the garden, was this funny little Guadalupe statue, which means more to me, perhaps, than, well, anyway, it fell over, and my son came down to help me begin the repairs of my garden. And so we stood her up, and this is a painting of Mary amongst the debris. It's a close-up of her. And I wanted to start this exhibit with this because basically this was my inspiration to begin painting something brand new. So as I was planting the garden, or renewing the garden and reconstructing the garden, I was also painting in my studio that's close to my back door. So the first thing I wanted to show was the hurricane washed this Mary statue perfectly clean. It didn't have any mold on it or anything left. And so it was a pure start to begin to develop a whole new style. So I don't know if I said this, but the show is about growth and change, or perhaps about change and growth. So the whole thing that I did is not about flowers, but about change and about how these flowers and pieces of gardens were something that that inspired me to experiment and to become myself, just like I was experimenting in the garden. The horrendous change in the garden, I showed this painting was about 2 years after Hurricane Harvey, and it's the way Mary looks now in the garden. And I put it here on purpose because it shows a feeling of joy and a total relaxation and pleasure with the same place. My garden, and also the change that went forth, I think in this grouping you can see the change of my style, which is what happened during this growth period. One of the things I've always done the best is been known for years is my Graphite Drawings. And this is an example. And there are some more drawings in the back. And again, I like to just change and draw and do whatever. Well, I began to think with my oil paintings, since my drawing is the most important to me, why can't I just draw in my oil paintings? paintings? Why do I have to do a traditional fill every piece of the canvas? So this was one of the beginnings of that experiment. And it was drawing these crinums, Mary's in the background, and why can't I just leave the canvas white? I mean, who says I have to fill everything in? And the other reason I left the canvas white is because I began to experiment with space. Sometimes it was three-dimensional space, which shows more in the back room, and other times it was just a feeling of space and peace in a garden. So a feeling of space was an experiment with these 3 paintings of my herb garden, which is the first time I've been able to grow herbs because it was sunny back there, and I couldn't grow them in my shaded garden before. So I did 3 paintings, and they're of the same place, but I wanted to show the space. And so this was the first one where I showed the space, the empty space, to give a feeling of light. This was just a second attempt, and I wanted to keep my brush strokes very loose. I, on purpose, was just painting and drawing at the same time. And then I didn't know if I could blow it up and make something larger out of this idea. And so this was my blow up. And you can see that in painting the same subject matter, one never can, or I certainly can't do it the same way. So across the room are just more experiments in different sizes. There is a different size in the zinnias, as you can see. Those were some of the beginning loose zinnia paintings that I did, and then I did several more, and the last one I did was a very large painting of a zinnia garden. I don't want to skip the blue one because I noticed that, so I left my garden. After 3 years, you need to go and paint somewhere else. So I started looking at gardens all over, and one of the places was the San Antonio Botanic Gardens. And it was a pond back there. And I guess I learned that several people stop at that blue pond and look, because it is a beautiful spot with a lot of different textures and shades of blue. This is what Harvey did to our trees. So it really begins it should be at the beginning of the show, but it ended up in a good corner. This is the showpiece of the exhibit, Beyond the Backdoor. Although any of the other large paintings could have come here, I think. I liked the bigness of it. It was my neighbor's canna. And when she saw it the other day, I didn't let her see that I painted it. She expected to see something very real. But I had warned her she might not recognize her cannas. Again, what I was experimenting with here was first the size, then the drawing, and the open space, and how one color relates to another. This was the very end of my painting experiments. I just finished it. It perhaps is my most favorite. It's a tua plant that came from a Victoria garden. And I like it the best because it's just a plant. It's just color. It's just lines. And it goes towards the abstract, but it isn't really. You still know exactly what it is. To move around the room just a little bit. First of all the little small ones that you see throughout the show that are very abstract, the ones that are abstract, are just the paint from my palette. And I think maybe you'll see a few more out in the front gallery. And I just painted them within 15 to 20 minutes to express the way I was feeling about the color. This is a Victoria garden, and it's called the Quiet Entrance, which, if you want to consider myself experimenting, it's very much more realistic than the rest of them. And sometimes I just like to do that. This is Colorado. I know it as Colorado because of the change in color. This is definitely South Texas, the one I first showed you, but then Colorado changes to lavenders and more subtle colors. This whole area is a trip that I took to Big Bend on purpose in April in order to see the cactuses blooming. A lot of people have commented on this Ocotillo plant, and again, it's very different than the others because of I think the meditative quality it took for me to put all those little dots on, and that's not usual. But I loved the gray background. It was a gray day when we were there, and I loved the gray background and the tiny little spots of red against the gray. These are Cactus Blossoms. Big Bend has purple cactuses, which you can't help but enjoy. And this is obviously a much more realistic example of painting, and it's just simply because those inaqua trees here on the Guadalupe River, or close to the Guadalupe River, you don't want to mess them up too much. You want them to really look like the trees if you can. And then we'll just go across the room real quick. This corner is something the water lilies come from the Denver Botanic Gardens. This is a neighbor's garden that she just grows the most magnificent caladiums. And she invited me over to see them one day for a glass of wine with her two little Yorkie dogs. And I just was inspired to do that a little more realistically than the rest. Oleatris, and then my sister's in Denver has a garden that you can see from her guest room balcony. So I tried to look down on something, and it has a whole different feel. But all of the top area in here is really the way I wish I could always paint. And these are an example of my graphite drawings from people's gardens here in Victoria, and one in Rockport. And I think that's it. I think that shows the variety, and although it's mixed up in the manner of how I experimented, I just had a whole heck of a lot of fun doing this and trying something new every day. One thing I forgot to mention earlier was that not only did I experiment with the size of the paintings and the style of the paintings, but I also experimented with the surface that I painted on and the way the paint is applied to the surface. I was a plein air watercolorist for over 30 years, and along the way I ended up needing to go back to my studio and relearn or re-experiment with oil painting. I had done that a lot in the past, but this was a whole renew. So actually this show is just the beginning of all of the constant oil painting that I do. But I couldn't quite finish up with some of my watercolors, but I didn't want to use them. So I put gesso paint gesso onto watercolor paper and tried to use my oil paints in a looser manner than more like my oils, or excuse me, more like my watercolors had been. I have 3 examples of that. I think I really like them. I want to try it. Not only do I like the paintings, but I also like the feeling of the way the paint is applied. So I have this one, which is called On the Water, and this one, which is Enclosed Garden. And like my watercolors, I would be very simplistic in my expression, but this is the fence, this is the ground, these are the plants, and that's all there is to it. Then I have one more in the front, 3rd watercolor, or the 3rd oil painting on watercolor paper that I did. And it's called Meadow. Again, it's just a very free expression of the paint on the textured paper. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you come to see the show. It's going to be held until December 20th, and I think we have had a lot of visitors so far, and hopefully you'll come along too. So thank you very much again. Thank you to the NAE. They've been great.